Hey guys, Kane here. So I am basically redoing this video for a second time, all because both of the Xeron and Devil videos I have shown previously, both of them have different Awaken skill sets, and I can say for a fact both have their uses. Even though one may seem a tad bit weaker, I will comment more regarding this whenever I reach the Awaken skills of the Devil. If you're here only to check that, I will be splitting this video into a few parts, and I will leave the times of them in the description below. So the time is finally upon us. The Devil Awakening is here, even though they most likely postponed it so much because of, particular reasons. I cannot say I did not expect this to happen whenever it comes out, because this was pretty much expected, though the sort of a nerf towards Nightmare made Devil weaker than it should have been. Not saying Nightmare does not have its uses, it is good in some events such as Dragon Invasion and Kingdom vs Kingdom. When it comes to regular PvP, if you already do not have good tanks on your field, you can possibly add Nightmare and upgrade it as you go. For most old servers, putting a tank in front row means you will need to upgrade it to the point that it would be able to tank the damage if Devil does not end up killing things. And many people, as far as I have noticed, are like, but hey, if your Devil doesn't kill shit, maybe your Devil is bad, and so on. Now when you want to add a unit onto your field, you have to know the pros and the cons of each unit, and every unit, even Devil, has their weaknesses, and majority of people fail to realize the weaknesses of units until they become very apparent. And Nightmare has two weaknesses, one being the cost of buying a tank for 50 bucks and needing to spend well over 120,000 dragon steel. That is the yellow barrack resource for it to be a decent frontline tank. I am sure some servers can add them earlier, some later, but the tank has to be invested on. And it's like, well, people don't realize that if Devil gets CC'd, like in let's say Pantheon or cross server Pantheon for instance, you don't necessarily know where you are sending your Devil on. You could send it on a Basilisk and your Devil will be CC'd for 10 to 15 to maybe even more seconds straight. And if the enemy has an Angel, that's another 6 seconds of denying the damage your Devil does. Do you honestly think that Nightmare can outlive as a tank while Devil is not able to kill things? There are a variety of units that can deny Xeron's ultimate, a variety of units that can stun the Devil. It is an offensive unit reworked into a tank, still pertaining some of its offensive capabilities, only with some stats swapped for it to tank better. Now if it was 1x, I would hands down put it as one of the better tanks. It being a 4x, it will not last long in many fights, and if your Devil happens to be CC'd for most of the early, it diminishes the tankiness that you can have, or another reliable buffer that you can have for a lot less the cost. And if you already know by now, I myself do not invest into things that I will not use in the future, or rather things that will be swapped out in the future if the cost of upgrading is too high. And for me and my own plans, I just do not see Nightmare in my formation for how weak it is. If it was an offensive unit, it would be giving 45% unit damage to the Devil, and that would find a place in my formation, as even if Devil got CC'd for most of the early, that would still be about 25% unit damage. It would still be a good buff, and if it's only 10%, that is basically useless, as there are units who can even double that for less the trouble. That damage reduction is near to useless to you. If you can see my last two Devil videos, my Devil clearly did not need the damage reduction %. Not saying you should not get it or anything, I'm saying you should realize that the unit itself is not overpowered as you deem it to be, as the unit has to be alive for the effects to actually be active. Alright, since I got that out of my chest, since too many people were commenting I say it's bad and I say it's good, whenever I say it's bad, people start arguing arguing and trying so hard to convince me otherwise. Whenever I say it has some uses, people started saying I was lying or stuff. I mainly just commented that there are far better SR Plus units in Xeron's composition, at least at the moment, in terms of, let's say, Manticore or Beholder, and those will be commented a little bit later in the video, and hopefully I will not need to answer the questions about Nightmare anymore. Now, Xeron, Devil and their formation, if many of you have noticed, Xeron and Devil formation is by far different than your average formation that you have currently seen, where most of the heroes buff the entire field. Xeron buffs the Devil, which increases in its damage. One can deem it overpowered, but if you stun or kill the Devil, it is most likely a guaranteed loss for the Xeron. There are many given methods, and even more introduced into global than China had before, though not many people notice them or use them, but since I am a Xeron main, I will not be giving even the hints of what they may be right now, as my fellow Inferno masochists deserve a time to shine. Xeron formation is, as I said for a long time, 7 buffers and 1 DPS, DPS being the Devil itself, while the buffers are either supports buffing his damage or tanks reducing the damage reduction % on the enemy, or even surviving for long amounts of time for Devil to have more time to do the work. All of these I deem as a buffer. Inferno has no single tank that can perform well late game, so you have to borrow the tanks from other factions, and that in itself can be a doozy, since if you break the chain of Inferno, it does not get healed and has no invincibilities. In China, most people ran full Inferno because of their synergies and buffs, while transferring this faction to global, they wanted to break the synergy since it was pretty strong, and most likely expected people to still play full Inferno. It has been months when I said Xeron and Devil will most likely never be good with many Inferno units, and I was using a Freety and Devil and the rest were different faction, like Rampart and Dungeon. I guess many deemed me as a troll and some others copied my formation, and I have heard that they had more success with what I have made than with Inferno units. However, this hero, or rather formation, is ever changing. It means you have to change it as your enemy changes its own. Like if you can tell from my last 2 videos of my Xeron beating the Kraken, I swapped 1 unit in that formation to achieve a winning result. So it is never one OP formation. You have to adapt. And dungeon units, for instance, are great with that. For example, Manticore, probably the sole unit in this game with so much threat in its kit that if it remains alive, it can be one of the reasons why you had no chance to win the battle. The silences are deadly and on its own can provide easily more than 20 seconds of silence on entire enemy field. Given some heroes do not dispel the silence, it has defense, damage reduction and tenacity debuffs on tanks, so it is one of the best tank debuffers if you have a good DPS to do damage towards them. As well, it is one of the best buffers / debuffers as well. If enemy heroes cast a spell, depending whichever choice you made on your Manticore's Awaken, it will either debuff the enemy field or buff your own. Beholder, this is probably the core unit of Xeron's formation and will remain core for a long time to come. As a 6-star, Beholder removes 30 starting mana from the enemy, and if you see what I am doing in my battles, Xeron and Devil has no issue killing enemy units, and if any unit on the enemy field is dead, they reduce in mana. And the 3rd Awaken star of Beholder unlocks a choice, either minus mana regeneration, which can only stack a few times, or additional minus 10 mana per enemy death, which would be a total of minus 30 starting mana and minus 20 mana per enemy unit's death. So for instance, if I enter battle versus say Dragon Muteer, unless they buy privilege mana buffs, they do not trigger the ultimate anytime before 30 seconds pass in the match, and that is already far too late to make any difference. Dwarf, a very underrated unit, and plenty deem it weak or stupid because they say, wow, it dies in 10 seconds, what good it does, it's not even a tank. And for me, it's not a tank. and I do not need it to remain alive, as the sole purpose of its existence on my field is to buff 4 units and then it can just die. Before any of you comment that Nightmare is better than Dwarf, not in Xeron composition, all because if you remember, I made a video how many additional attacks Devil receives from 10% attack speed buff through Cassandra. If a Dwarf is buffing 23% attack speed, you can make your own numbers how much that may add to Devil's damage, and attack speed is just one of the few things that the Dwarf has. It also boosts unit damage, and all of these remain even if Dwarf is dead, or so I believe. I am sure the 3 tanks and a Afriti should be self-explanatory by now if you are playing the game. If not, Afriti is one of the main reasons Devil does this insane damage, because of the Afriti fire shield giving a number of buffs both to offensive stats and defensive stats, as well as the entire field burn with the Broiling Impact Awaken skill, while all the 3 tanks on the field are all removing defenses of the enemy tanks or providing some debuffs on them to do less damage, thus making them tankier further. They're all free tanks with no diamonds needed to be invested on. Moving to emblems, they play an important part in terms of Devil's damage. Previously I said anger was good on base because we had a choice over anger or jealousy, and because Devil had almost no critical value, Devil did not activate the jealousy emblem stats most of the time. Thus the comparison between anger and jealousy, anger was better, but I specifically stated that jealousy scales better to late game and is the safer option to upgrade, while right now with the crossover event being introduced, bringing Path of the Assassin emblems into it, increased Devil's critical hit value and thus increasing the damage of the Devil overall. You can see similar things happening on a unit like Naga, who already has high critical and high critical damage percent. Path of the Assassin emblem scales the damage to some insane numbers because of the critical value already being pretty high, and the penetration also comes into play, and from what most of us have noticed, it only activates during the critical hits, or rather is the most visible during them. So for most of the time, it is only good on a few select units such as Devil, Naga, Serpentfly and so on, who have their own inbuilt critical value increases. Now for the Awaken skills, the ultimate trigger choices have a huge difference between them. One provides 200% damage increase on assumingly all the triggers of the ultimate. Even though it says 1, many people reported to me that it is happening on most of them, as the damage is far superior than on the other option, and I myself have noticed it as well as it provides immunity for 5 seconds to any damage, while the other option is more broken, in a good and a bad way. The 100% crit damage seems to be deactivated, or we could deem it so, but it could also be activated, but only towards the Devil's basic attacks. And no, don't worry, that's not the secret sauce. That made me do the 70% of the Behemoth's HP, but it could have potentially scaled that damage. As silly as it may sound, when I did this fight, I had both Awaken skills on the right side, and what happened here was a combination of 2 things, that being Silence and Dispel. Many skills on units have both active and passive damage reduction percentages. If you check most of your behemoths, they have a low damage reduction percent, and that does not mean that they are weak in the damage reduction percent, as one of their skills that they have, and what I have noticed many good tanks that are 1x have, is something that I would like to call an active passive. So instead it's already activating on your own stats before the fight, like in your own unit page, they activate during the fight, which counts itself as a buff. Silence prevents the unit from activating that buff, while Dispel removes it. So for example, if you have a Behemoth skill giving 24% damage reduction, if you silence the Behemoth, this skill will still be in effect, but if you dispel it, it will lose this effect for the entirety of the silence duration. When the silence fades, it will regain this damage reduction percent. This works the same with Dendroid's Awaken skill, which gives itself 20% damage reduction and 20% more against bleeding targets. My devil ends up chopping the 3 for the same. As the skill, it also has what I call active passive. Black Dragon has the same, though it also has another skill that it cannot take more than 10% health damage per hit. And since I do not have one upgraded myself, or I just cannot land on proper timings on the enemy's Black Dragon, I cannot test Black Dragon properly myself. This, however, does not work on many tanks, as many of the SR and R tanks add most of the DR percentages already in the unit tab section, while the 1X tanks has them as active passives. I guess this is made for the tanks not to be entirely broken. The damage one attack did scale into more than 3 million on one basic attack towards the behemoth, since I had Centaur and Manticore in that same line, with additional debuffers on the side, with Minotaur being able to reach the behemoth to also debuff it. When the silence and dispel hit the behemoth, it easily went below 0% damage reduction, and any percent further would inflate the damage devil would do, since if I would add most of my percentages, I would only happen to reach like 2 million damage or so, that being like 500% damage increase on a basic attack on a 0% damage reduction target. At the same time, the Kraken having over 1800 hero defense to mine 1300 attack. So in short, it is not that devil is broken, it is that I had so many debuffs in terms of damage reduction and defenses, and buffs on devil in having maybe close to 70% unit damage, more or less, that when the silence and dispel hit the behemoth, it was worse than any backline unit that I have faced, because I do not have any armor removers in the backline of the enemy, because in many cases, at best I could ever do was 2 million damage towards something like a 1x rock. But more than 3 million damage towards a tank is just mind-blowing, and this is pretty much the only way to explain it, and it does kinda make sense when you think about some particular skills of the units adding damage reduction percent, but those damage reduction percent not appearing on the unit itself, which means they activate during the battle or at the beginning of the battle, and that can be dispelled. Again, it works only for a few particular tanks. Those that I have tested against are Behemoth and Dendroid. This theory checks out. Black Dragon I cannot test because the timing is not even near to silence and dispel, and I have tried many times, and my own Black Dragon is not nearly as good to do any tests on. You are free to test some other units yourself, but many SR and R units have passive buffs that do show in the unit tab, so then we can deem these as actual passives. While the SSR units have passives that proc only in the battle, which I deem as active passives, those that do not upgrade your unit in terms of stats, but activate only during the battle. So yeah, probably that was a doozy for you, but when some people have seen my replay, they nearly guessed that, and some I think got the exact same idea, just did not say anything. If you would ask me, is this broken? And I would answer you no, because this is how it is in this game. And this is a combination of two skills and multiple debuffs for this effect to be this way. It only works on specific few tanks, but those tanks to be the strongest in the game. So even if this 100% crit damage is deactivated, that dispel itself could potentially add you insane amounts of damage depending how you use that dispel of the devil. Both of the awakens are situational and they depend on the enemy composition, as the first video I released after Awaken was with the left side of the ultimate trigger, while the second was with the right one. While the second Awaken skill, 1000 crit value, is far superior than minus 50% defense removal, I don't know, it is just that that crit procs right after the Xeron's ultimate, and you just easily wipe the floor with anything. Minus 50% defense would perhaps be useful if enemy had 4 or more tanks and you had literally no defense or damage reduction percent removals. Yeah, imagine me saying Dendroid, Centaur and Minotaur, the best free tanks for months, and still seeing people run Demon, Ogre and Imp, and saying Devil is stuck on tanks. Then perhaps the 50% defense removal could be effective. I don't know really, but to me 1000 crit value is far superior. The future plans of this formation are probably to get me a second perfect jealousy and make it +9. I think I need only 16,000 diamonds more to spend on the Lucky Snatch to get it, as I have already rolled way too much on it. In terms of assassin emblems, I suggest you to get Holy Attack and Attack Amplification on them, and keep the +3 for the time being. They can release better emblems in the future through various crossovers or events, and that could make the assassin emblems obsolete. So the choice is yours, and most likely my assassins will remain +3 for a long time. In terms of units, I myself am thinking of perhaps getting a Black Dragon to 6-star and 3-star Awaken. Now don't get me wrong, I am not telling you to do that yourself, as I have it 40 shards away from 6-star and it costs 13,000 diamonds to awaken it to 3-star, and since it is a 1x tank, it could potentially increase my field's capability to tank a lot more damage. So it is easy for me to get that since I already have it very close to that level. Whether or not it will perform up to spec, I have no clue, but 1x tank is quite a bit better than 4x's. There won't be any units that I would replace in the near future unless they do happen to bring in one unit that is not yet released. I think that is pretty much it really. There is no hidden secret, just that you need to combine a few debuffs and a few skill effects to receive game-breaking results. Hope this will help you do the same. Thanks for watching guys, and stay safe.